The United States has pledged an unprecedented level of defense funding to the Philippines, just days after announcing a major overhaul of its military command in Japan. The U.S. Secretary of State and Defense Secretary in Manila reiterating support for its Asia-Pacific allies in the face of China's growing influence in the region.
We're now allocating an additional $500 million in foreign military financing to the Philippines to boost security collaboration with our oldest treaty ally in this region. Both of us share concerns, and many other countries in the region share concerns as well, about some of the actions that the People's Republic of China has taken, escalatory actions in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and elsewhere.
This level of funding is unprecedented, and it sends a clear message of support for the Philippines from the Biden-Harris administration, the U.S. Congress, and the American people.
We are optimistic that with robust cooperation in 4 dimensions, land, sea, air, and cyber, extensive interoperability both bilaterally and with like-minded nations, the U.S.-Philippine alliance will be a significant contributor to regional peace and stability.
Tensions between Beijing and Manila have risen over the last year over territorial dispute in the South China Sea. Although there are signs the maritime spat has eased after the Philippines completed a resupply mission without any incident with China. Mr. Blinken will be heading to Singapore next in his whirlwind tour of Asia. And for more, CNA's Buena Bernal joins us live from Metro Manila. Buena, what more do we know about this $500 million in funding to the Philippine military that Washington has pledged?
While the United States has labeled that $500 million investment to the Philippines Armed Forces and the Philippines Coast Guard as a once-in-a-generation investment, U.S. Secretary of National Defense Lloyd Austin III did explain and carefully phrase that the U.S. Department of Defense will work closely with the U.S. Congress to deliver this foreign military assistance. He said that during that press briefing after the 2+2 dialogue here inside the Philippine Military National Headquarters. And that commitment, according to Philippine Secretary of Defense Gilberto Teodoro Jr., will help ensure the Philippines' minimum credible defense posture, which is how security observers call a nation's ability to effectively ward off intruders or unlawful aggressors. Now, the question that emerged here, of course, is how credible will that commitment be, given an impending change in leadership after the U.S. elections late this year, to which U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken explained that this commitment actually has bipartisan support. Secretary Austin also reaffirming the United States' ironclad commitment to its oldest security ally in the Indo-Pacific. And Secretary Teodoro of the Philippines also saying that the reason likely for that bipartisan support is because this commitment is rooted on a sound principle of ensuring a rules-based international order. Now, the United States also vowed to double its investments to sites covered by the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. This is a military deal between the U.S. and the Philippines that allows U.S. access to Philippine bases through the construction of U.S.-funded facilities for the Philippines' use. The officials, visiting U.S. officials, explaining that that amounts to some $128 million investment this year. And Secretary Teodoro again explaining that that investment will help the Philippines in terms of civil defense, in terms of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, given that the Philippines is the most typhoon-prone country in Southeast Asia, with an average of 20 typhoons each year hitting this archipelago. The two countries also reaffirmed their commitment for further quadrilateral cooperation with Japan and Australia, as well as other like-minded partners. And as in previous 2+2 dialogues. The two countries also reaffirmed commitment in terms of not just modernizing the shared defense capabilities, but also in terms of strengthening their people-to-people ties and advancing environmental and economic security.
Buena, you mentioned concern about, I suppose, changing possible commitment from the U.S. side, given the change in leadership come November in Washington. Of course, that concern possibly fed by the fact that Philippine ties with the U.S. did change between one president and the next, from Rodrigo Duterte to the current president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr.
That's right. Secretary Blinken of the United States saying that the U.S.-Philippines alliance right now is at the strongest it has ever been. And that comes from the perceived pivot to China of former President Rodrigo Duterte, who was seen as establishing warmer ties with Beijing. He even jump-started the abrogation of the U.S.-Philippines Visiting Forces Agreement, which allows U.S. soldiers on Philippine soil on a rotational basis. Of course, that abrogation cut short during the visit of Secretary Austin to the Philippines at that time. Compare that to Mr. Marcos, who expanded the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement from an initial 5 bases to now 9 bases. And earlier Tuesday morning, actually, these two high-ranking U.S. officials paid a courtesy call to President Marcos, who thanked the U.S. for this open line of communication that he says allows for a more agile security alliance, allows for a continuing re-examination of that alliance, especially when it comes to the West Philippine Sea, given the rising tensions in the past year and a half between the Philippines and China that took an unprecedented level on June 17, when we saw a Filipino sailor severely injured in what the Philippines called a brutal assault by China.
Well, thanks, Buena Bernal reporting live to us there from Metro Manila.